the Wilson Auditorium on the Glassboro State College, this is a New Jersey Network special report, Campaign 81, the Gubernatorial Debates. This third debate between Democrat James Florio and Republican Thomas Kean is sponsored by the Gloucester County Times and the South Jersey Chamber of Commerce. The moderator for this debate is Dick Sharon of station KYW, Philadelphia.
On November 3rd, the voters of New Jersey will elect a new governor. It is a decision that will affect all our lives for the next 4 years. Now, the whole point of this debate is to have you see and hear the major candidates for governor to help you make an intelligent decision on Election Day. Without any further ado, we will announce the candidates who are with us this afternoon. First, Jim Florio. Mr. Florio is a Democrat and a member of the United States Congress. Also with us today is Mr. Tom Kean. Mr. Kean is a Republican and a former member of the New Jersey State Legislature. Now, in just a moment, both men will make a brief opening statement, and then they will take questions from our panelists. And I'd like to introduce our panelists right now. First, Mr. Tom Green is chairman of the South Jersey Chamber of Commerce Legislative Committee. Mr. Fred Petrie is editor of the Gloucester County Times editorial page. Mr. William Angus, he is chairman of the board of the Chamber of Commerce. And Susan Caulfield, she is the Times Sunday editor. Mr. Kean, your opening statement, please.
Give me where the timekeeper is.
Pardon?
Is there a timekeeper?
Yes, I'm keeping time.
Okay, you let me know when there's 30 seconds.
I'll let you know
Okay.
when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the South Jersey Chamber of Commerce and the college for having us here. This kind of debate, this kind of confrontation or joint appearance, whatever you want to call it, between two candidates is, after all, the essence of what we're talking about in a democracy, comparing our views and contrasting them. I hope we're going to have some more debates. We accepted 4 or 5 in southern New Jersey, and I'm still hopeful that maybe we'll be able to have one more if Jim will also accept at least one more. But in just over 2 weeks, I guess now, New Jersey is going to have elected a new governor. Very little time remains for you, the voters, after all, to assess our backgrounds, our positions, our qualifications, and it's very, very important that you know what all those positions and qualifications are. I've served in government. I've been a leader in government. Time and time again, my colleagues in the legislature elected me to leadership. They made me minority leader, majority leader, Speaker of the Assembly, and in that position, I was even able to serve as acting governor. I'm proud that time and time again, when independent rating services were questioned, they rated me always as one of the very best members of the state legislature. I've also run a business, and that's important, because I understand the private sector and how that works. It's funny, you know, somebody told me the other day I'd be the first businessman elected as governor since the 1940s, and that wouldn't be all bad for the state either. I've been a teacher. I've taught at all levels. A matter of fact, a year ago at this time, I was teaching government to graduate students at our state university. In addition to our backgrounds, you also have a right to know our positions on major state issues. How we'll create jobs, what will we do about violent crime, how we're going to improve the quality of education, about system of transportation, and what we're going to do, after all, about toxic wastes. From the outset of this campaign, I've put forward a series of proposals to address each and every one of those concerns. I've been honest with the people of this state. I've told them what they can expect from a Kean administration. I've spelled out my differences with Brendan Byrne and his administration, and I've repeatedly called on Jim to do the same. He has not yet. Perhaps today he will. Last time we met, I asked Jim a few questions to attempt to draw him out and help the debate. I asked him if he approved of Commissioner Fred Burke and his educational policies and whether or not he'd keep Mr. Burke on as commissioner if he were elected. I asked about his campaign chairman, Jim Sheeran, and a man who's driven, after all, 10 insurance companies now or more out of this state. I asked him if he was going to bring him back to government. I asked Jim whether or not he would increase the New Jersey state income tax And to the best of my knowledge, Jim, you still haven't answered those questions. Let's broaden the questions a bit today. Let's ask something even a little more general. Is there any Byrne cabinet member whose policy you disapprove of? Is there any Byrne cabinet member who you would remove? Is there any major Byrne policy with which you disagree? And if so, what policy is it? These questions are important. I've answered those kind of questions. It's time, Jim, that you answered them also. And what about South Jersey? Here we are today. We're in a region of the state that's been hurt by these policies more than any other region. This part of the state has been overregulated and underrepresented in every single way. You know and I know that South Jersey doesn't have proper representation in any number of boards and commissions or in the cabinet. Perfect example of that is the Casino Control Commission, when no real person who resides and lives in South Jersey is on that commission. Actually, you know, we could do something about that today. Brendan Burns nominated a guy who lives in Essex County. He said because he can't get confirmed from there, he's going to move down to Ocean County, and then he'll be a new Casino Control Commissioner. Jim, we can stop that. Let's take a pledge today. First, let's both of us ask the Senate to block that nomination, and then will you pledge with me here today that when elected, after that nomination is blocked, that we will nominate a person who truly resides in southern New Jersey to be that Casino Control Commissioner? I'll take that pledge today, Jim, if you'll take it. Every time I pick up the papers, I see that another Byrne cabinet appointee has contributed to Jim Florio. I go to forums expecting to meet Jim, and I've met Bill Hamilton, Joe Molino, and most recently John Degnan. I'm tired of seeing our state and its governor a subject of ridicule. Is that time?
That's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Florio, 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you very much. Over the past number of months, as many of you know, I've been traveling around the state, talking to the people at the plant gates, at docks, on the college campuses, learning about what is of concern to the people of this state. And they've taught me a lot. They've taught me that, in fact, they have got concerns about the way government in general operates. Likewise, in my capacity, and I'm very pleased to be back home into my own congressional district. The last 7 years have enabled me to develop relationships with people, all people, regardless of their party, regardless of their political affiliation, to try to determine how it is that we can deal with problems. And we have in the South, in the southern portion of the state, felt left out. But you know what? There are people in other parts of the state that likewise feel that they haven't been brought into the process over the last number of years. And it's just not the last 8. It's been the last long period of time. There's no reason why any area should feel that it isn't part of New Jersey. And I'm committed to making sure that we have one New Jersey with everyone being represented in that state. And there's another thing that I've learned as I've gone around. It's the fact that people feel good about our state. It's not the basket case that Tom says that it is. Just within the last week, I have been to firms that have moved to our state or expanding within our state. Nabisco, TRW, Western Electric, in our local area. Honda has moved to Mount Laurel. U.S. Steel has moved from Michigan to New Jersey. Stone & Webster, a large engineering firm, is expanding in Cherry Hill. We have good things happening in the state, and we've got to expand upon them, and we've got to build them. We are going to have problems, sure. We know the policies in Washington are giving us more responsibilities and less money, but we can deal with the problems because we need to capitalize on those assets that we have. A forceful, strong governor can do that by making our government efficient and lean and a partner with the private sector. I'm committed to going forward in a very forceful way, ensuring that the governor's office is the focal point for a systematic overview of our government to ensure that it is cost effective. It's not going to be that we're going to be able to improve the business climate by the types of mechanical, simplistic, supply-side economic formulas that Tom is talking about in terms of giving away our revenues to corporate New Jersey. We've got to have a plan. And my plan includes a number of specifics that I've talked about through the course of the state. First, a targeted tax cut plan that will ensure that tax benefits will bring back to our state revenues, particularly tilted towards small business, where 75 to 80% of our new jobs are created. Specifically, I would exempt from the net worth tax all new capital investment, a specific inducement to induce business to expand within our state. Second, real regulatory reform. We have to have regulations to protect our environment, to protect our health. But when regulation goes beyond achieving the goal, it's wasteful. I have specifically stated a program for detailed cost-benefit analysis of regulations before they go into effect. Third, the improvement of our transportation system. The problem we've had is we've never had the certainty, security, and stability of a dedicated transportation fund that will allow us to plan on more than just a year-by-year basis. Fourth, we need an educational system that will not only teach our children the basic skills, but remove the red tape and the bureaucracy so as to allow us to go beyond that, to give our kids the skills that they're going to need for the new high-technology future in this state. Fifth, energy and the environment, they are not incompatible. We can have a clean environment that generates jobs. Energy-wise, we should be at the threshold of encouraging the new resource recovery types of facilities, converting garbage into energy. I'm very proud of what's happened in Woodbury. I think Woodbury can be a lead area for the rest of the state. Sixth and last, crime. We've got to address the problem of crime, and I'm pleased that the FOP and the PBA support my positions to target in on career criminals. I'm not prepared, and the people of this state are not prepared to gamble with the voodoo economic type approach that's been advocated.
Mr. Florio.
We need hard work, sensitive application of government. Thank you.
Okay, it's the panelists' turn now to ask questions. Each man will get 3 minutes to respond, and then they will have 1.5 minutes each for a rebuttal. That'll be the good part. Okay. First question will come from Mr. Tom Green. He is chairman of the Chamber's Legislative Committee. Tom?
Thank you, Dick. Mr. Kean, my question to you is this. Since the ports of Camden and Gloucester contribute to thousands of jobs in themselves and are very important to business and industry in the South Jersey area, what specifically would you do to help the South Jersey Port Corporation and the Delaware Port Authority, as well as those in the private sector who are working to bring business into the South Jersey area?
Well, one of the biggest problems we've had is that we have had no overall regional development which will spur economic help to any part of this state. That port facility is one of the greatest assets that this part of the state has, or that the state has as a whole. I would like to see, first of all, a greater participation between the private and the public sector in the area of the Port Authority. Government can help in that way. Government can help bring people in. I believe, for instance, in that Port Authority area, you can have a lot more what I call assemblage groups, not only for things coming into the port, but things going out of the port. We can create jobs by the kind of economic incentives that I've already recommended in other parts of my program, and help them to locate in that area, because that Port Authority area is an essential part of what can bring firms and bring people to New Jersey. Beyond that, in that Port Authority, we have already some firms that I think with some help could expand. in the Camden area in particular, any kind of help to that city, any kind of redevelopment, anything that's going to happen, an awful lot of it's going to happen because of that port and because of the state's commitment to make uses of all its resources to bring the kind of development that's needed into that port.
Mr. Florio?
What we need is a higher degree of regional cooperation which expands beyond just our borders. The Philadelphia Port entity has to be addressed as a totality. That we have started to express that process to people on the other side of the river and are starting to get some good sense of cooperation. There has to be a greater degree of coordination. You've mentioned two. There probably are 2 or 3 more entities that you can mention that have a piece of the port action. There has to be more consolidation and more control over the total resources. The state of New Jersey can and should play a very vital role in trying to induce more activity in that area. The Port Authority has a World Trade Division that has not utilized its resources for a number of reasons the way that it should be in promoting overseas awareness of our port. The whole question of the port has to be addressed also in the context of our transportation network. It does no good to bring things in or out of the port if you can't get them to their ultimate destination. The Transportation Dedicated Fund that I talked about will help us to emphasize not only road development, but the greater reliance upon railroad development as well. We are now on the verge of a major coal export boom worldwide. The world wants our coal. Philadelphia and Camden can be major areas for exporting of coal if we get the cooperation between the port facility people, the transportation facility people, and all of the public agencies that are involved. It's going to take leadership on the part of the chief executive of the state who was committed to doing those things. I've already become involved in my capacity as a congressman, and we've seen some things happen that have been noticeable improvements. There is much more that can be done, and as the chief executive of the state of New Jersey, I'm committed to doing that.
We've got to realize that development in the port, or anywhere else in this area, or any area of the state, is not going to occur in any meaningful way unless the state does something to improve its reputation for overall economic development. We're not going to bring facilities to the port. We're not going to get the kind of shipping Jim talks about. We're not going to get the cooperation needed from the private sector because there isn't enough of a private sector to give that cooperation in this area unless we do something to improve this economy. And you talk about the area around Camden. No place in the state has got more problems and more lack of economic development and been hurt harder by the kind of permanent recession we've had in this state since 1973. Jim, Your program, what you just said, has no possibility of working, unless it's coupled with something like my program for economic development, which will bring this kind of activity to the state, and particularly to the fort.
Let me just say that if there's anybody in this room or anybody in the audience that believes that Tom's proposal of giving away $1 billion of revenues of this state to the major multinational corporations over the next 3 years is going to induce them not to go to Hong Kong or Taiwan, but rather to go to Camden, they are extremely naive. What I'm suggesting is that, of course, it's not easy, but it has to be addressed on a point-by-point basis. The transportation system is key. That Camden, we want to talk about Camden? Camden is the hub of South Jersey. A transportation network can be completed there so as to provide for economic opportunities for the people of the city of Camden. A rail link that would run from Camden to Atlantic City, from Philadelphia to Atlantic City, would be a great boom. And we're going to do that, but we're not going to do it if we go and gut government that has to play a part in the public-private sector partnership. And that's the essence of what has to be done over the next 4 years.
As things warm up, let's call on Fred Petrie. Fred is the editor of the Gloucester County Times editorial page. Fred.
The problem of transportation has already been mentioned a number of times. Despite approval in 1979 of a state bond issue, which was designed to generate $2.1 billion for transportation projects, nothing has happened in the way of transportation in South Jersey. Our question is, how do you propose to get these bond funds working here to obtain additional revenues that will be needed for transportation? And what are your specific priorities for transportation in New Jersey? The question is directed first to Congressman Florio.
Yes, thank you very much, Fred. As we've talked in the past, there is a need to first call to the attention of those decision makers who are at the state level that we have transportation problems in South Jersey. There are serious problems in North Jersey. I've been to Route 4 and Route 17, places that are tremendously horrendous in terms of problems. But what we're saying is that there should be some attention focused in our area so that we can avoid those types of problems. We have brought into this state some $400 million over the last number of years in UMTA capital funding. Very little, if any, has come to the southern portion of the state. What we're going to have to do is, first of all, and I suspect my election will bring someone who is aware of the Ellisburg Circle, someone who is aware of the need for Route 40 to be modernized, someone who's aware of the need of 55. What I'm suggesting is not that we in South Jersey are going to get everything. Certainly that would be naive. What I'm suggesting is that there has to be a higher degree of awareness. And the transportation dedicated fund that I'm talking about is absolutely essential, because you don't plan highways or mass transportation on a year-by-year basis depending upon the generosity or lack thereof of the legislature. We have had some bond issues which have not been used as expeditiously as possible, and they go back, by the way, over a great number of administrations. So what I'm suggesting is, from this point forward, we have to ensure the stability that will come from a dedicated fund so that we can do the planning and then, of course, draw the priorities. The people in some areas say that Route 24 is the highest priority. Many of us feel that 55 is a priority. That's the decision-making process that's got to be completed. But the key thing is stability and certainty. Talk was made of business and a business-like approach. No business would run that didn't have an opportunity to plan to put back into the plant a certain amount of money and capital to maintain the resources. That's what I'm saying, is we have to have that business-like approach. Tom has rejected the idea of a dedicated fund, ensuring that our transportation dollars go for transportation. I think it's the essence of a good transportation network in the state over the next number of years.
Kean.
First of all, I haven't rejected the idea of a dedicated fund. As a matter of fact, I've suggested dedicating a few more monies to the area of transportation than you have. The dedicated funds that you've suggested would end up with a declining gasoline tax to mean less monies for transportation for New Jersey, not more. So I don't... But look, it's obvious to anybody who looks at this state that South Jersey has been ignored. That's not a statement. It's a question. It's a statement of simple truth, and also the use of New Jersey bond issues, the way those have been used in the past, has been a travesty in many cases, and I recognize that. Or not used, for that matter. You know what I found out the other day? We had a bond issue in 1968. Some of those funds are still not used. Can you believe that? with all the problems we have in transportation in this state? No, look, we've got to do an awful lot of things in transportation in this area. I think the extension of the PATCO line is an absolute necessity in this, in this state. I think that, and I'm not talking about necessarily extending it down to Atlantic City. It's got to come into this area. I mean, this is where I can't talk about the economic development I've talked about. I can't talk about my Pacific plan to bring jobs into this state unless I also talk about transportation. And I'm perfectly willing to talk about Pacific projects and the lack of the state involvement. I mentioned PATCO a little while ago. You know, the state of New Jersey wouldn't even bring its people in to study whether or not that should go down Route 55 or that the alternate route, perhaps to Millville, should be considered. Couldn't even get a study done. In my administration, that study will be done and we'll decide which way it ought to go, the best and most efficient way. And bus transportation, is terribly important. We're getting 1,000 buses in the state of New Jersey. Under this administration, you're going to get maybe a little over 100 of those 1,000. And if you want to know where they go, you want to know the routes and everything else, you know what you got to do? You got to call Newark. Under my administration, you will have an office of New Jersey Transit in South Jersey, so you will be able to find out where things go. As far as highways go, hey, I know that's been ignored also. I don't think there's a higher priority in this state, Jim, than Route 55. That has got to be, that to my mind has got to be completed. We've also got to make some interconnections. You know, you talk about where Route 55 and 42 intersect. That's got to be improved. We've got to talk about 41 in Deptford. We've got to talk about Delby Drive and Highway 47. And you know something else? We've got to talk for once in this administration perhaps about cutting some grass on our highways also. I mean, that's got to be done too.
You have a minute and a half, Mr. Florio, for rebuttal.
Yes. First of all, when we leave here, we'll drive down Delsey Drive so we can find out. And then I'm pleased, by the way, something new has come out of this. I think we now have a clear, unequivocal statement, which has not been here before, that Tom will support a dedicated transportation tax, because that has not been clear and unequivocal. So that I would commend the panel for having elicited from Tom that commitment that is now taking place. And then I would hope Tom's enthusiasm for mass transportation, for new buses, for all of those programs would be able to be translated into his willingness to call upon the administration in Washington not to go forward with its ill-advised transportation programs, which will cut off operating assistance, scale down capital assistance. Those policies make no sense, and I would hope that Tom would go on record as saying that those policies make absolutely no sense and will inhibit our ability to provide for a good transportation network for the state of New Jersey.
Jim, I've talked, as you have, to Drew Lewis, the Secretary of Transportation in Washington, and you know, as I do, that this administration's commitment to capital expenditures is still there, and it's still great, and it will still happen. And the kind of improvements we're talking about in many cases are capital expenditures, and this is the area of the state that most needs those capital expenditures and will benefit by that kind of a commitment. But beyond that, as you know, as you very well know, I have called on the administration in the area of operating subsidies. Beyond that, I've also written to our congressional delegation. I didn't write to you because you were here, I think, and not there, but I wrote to our congressional delegation and asked them, and any block grant monies that are considered in the transportation area, to make sure that New Jersey, we in government, have the option to use some of those monies, if we so desire, for operating subsidies, if we need them for our mass transportation. That seems to me sensible, and Ed Forsyth has agreed to lead that kind of a drive in the Congress. I'm delighted, frankly, with the relationship I have with this administration. All the things you would like to see done, I will try to do because I have a good relationship with this administration. I think that will help the state of New Jersey. And I'm also glad to hear about the facts of things you've been working for in Washington, Jim. I hope when I'm governor you'll continue to work with my administration to help in that area.
The next question will come from Bill Angus. Bill is chairman of the board of the South Jersey Chamber of Commerce. Mr. Angus.
Thank you, Dick. My question is for Tom Kean. Existing environmental regulations have repeatedly been given as the major bureaucratic logjam preventing progress in farm production and the establishment of new manufacturing plants. How would you confront this logjam to become competitive with our neighboring states and at the same time protect us from the real problems of air and water pollution and toxic wastes?
Well, you know, it's a good question, Bill. Someone asked me a while ago what I thought was the greatest problem in the environment in New Jersey, and I only semi-humorously said Department of Environmental Protection. Because one of the things we have to do is simply improve the efficiency and the speeding up of the permit process in that department. As you know, one of the worst things that can happen to a business is delay. That has caused a lot of businesses simply not to come to New Jersey because they knew the long delays that department caused in our permit process. What I've suggested, I'm going to do the same thing that's been done in Washington. I'm going to ask somebody of the prominence of Vice President Bush in the state of New Jersey, comparable prominence, to head a commission which is going to look at every single one of those rules and regulations. Which ones are necessary? Which ones aren't? Let's examine them one by one. Which ones are not helping that much in the environment and yet are hurting economic development? Where is the balance and where can it be achieved? I'm an advocate of clean air and clean water. I always have been and I always will be, and I recognize that toxic waste is perhaps the largest problem that this state's going to have. That area we've got to get into to protect our industrial development as much as anything else. The toxic waste that now exists in our state, that's leaching into our water supplies in some cases, is actually in certain parts of this state. I know one company that has reconsidered a decision already to come to New Jersey because it found there was a toxic waste site in the area that was leaching into the water supply. The question was, how serious would it be? Nobody knew, and that firm is now reconsidering its decision to come to New Jersey. Now, in that area, redirecting the Department of Environmental Protection to concentrate on an area like toxic waste, to make sure that seepage does not get into our water supplies, that we are protected in the terms of health. I've got a long-range program and a short-range program for toxic waste involving criminal penalties for those who illegally dump toxic waste, involving use of that $100 million bond issue for serious places that are now plagued by toxic waste. To me, that's a balanced strategy. We've got to use it. But first thing we've got to do is examine every one of those rules and regulations and see which ones we really don't need if we're really going to have a balanced economic development structure in this state.
Respectfully, I'm not sure I agree with all the points of your premise. I don't think that New Jersey has conducted itself in a way in terms of the environment so as to have that as a major factor driving business away or inhibiting business from staying in this state. I think we can be proud of much that we've done. There are obviously always things that we can be doing to improve regulatory implementation. The concept of cost-benefit analysis is something that everyone now acknowledges is important to do. I've talked about a strong governor's office that is going to take control to a much greater extent of the budgetary process, the planning process, and the regulatory process, ensuring that new regulations from this point forward are cleared through the governor's office to ensure that they meet that test of achieving the health goal or the environmental goal or the workers' safety goal in a way that has not become regulation for the sake of regulation. I think that can be done. I think that's something that should be done. Over and above that, the strong governor's office that I would preside over would initiate the process department by department, of scrutinizing those regulations that are already in process. I think it's important that we go forward and make sure, in an orderly way, we can't do this overnight, that those regulations that are there are achieving the purposes and in the most efficient way possible. The Clean Air Act is a good example. I have no difficulty with the approaches that have been taken, which says, well, you define what it is that we want the overall standards to be, and then we provide to the companies the flexibility to achieve those standards with whatever technology they want to. The idea of defining the technology to achieve the standard is counterproductive. The whole concept of the bubble theory in the clean air. You define an area, say we want to achieve certain ambient air quality standards, and then the industries in the area can use their own technology to achieve that. That's flexibility that is conducive to clean environmental health, and it's also conducive to giving to businesses the flexibility to achieve those admittedly acceptable standards in a cost-effective way. I would also, for the benefit of small business, support legislation such as I supported and voted for in the last administration that is called the Small Business Flexibility Act, saying that my governor's office will look at regulations and see what their impact is upon big business and small business. And there are definite differences of impact that we're going to have to make adjustments, because systems that are easily dealt with by large companies may very well not be easily dealt with by small companies. So we've got to have that flexibility to adapt within the confines of protection of health and environment to the needs of the small business people as well.
What we've got to have in the area of environmental protection, obviously, is a balanced approach. But in that balanced approach, we have got to make sure that in the area of clean air, clean water, and clean earth, frankly, the kind of thing people in the environmental movement call the biosphere, that's got to be protected, because that's important for economic development. It's important for me and you and our families and how we're going to live in this state. We, unfortunately, are preempted in many ways from using, for the moment, monies that we have in the state to clean up in the area of toxic waste. Hopefully that implementation will come through soon. Hopefully we'll be able to use some monies from Superfund. But in the meantime, in the area of toxic waste, we have got to have that $100 million bond issue. I would urge everybody here to work for it. It's important in every area of the state. It's particularly important in this area, and Bridgeport, and Lapari landfill, Lone Pine, all those examples are areas that we have got to clean up, both for people's health and for economic development and the creation of jobs. That, to me, is extremely important. And I'll just say also, in connection with something like Rollins that isn't far from here, in my mind, look, they've been given another year. At the end of that year, they're going to be evaluated, and if they're not meeting standards, they're going to be closed down.
One of the great opportunities that we have in this time, if we have the initiative and the drive, is to create a whole new industry of resource recovery, a private sector industry that will convert not only our solid waste, our garbage, into energy, so as to avoid the need to landfill, as we have been doing with such disastrous results across the state, and particularly in our own area, in terms of groundwater contamination. But also resource recovery in the area of the new technology to dispose of hazardous waste in safe and sanitary ways. I remember one of our first debates, Tom made reference to landfilling of hazardous waste, a technology that no one I know of who knows anything about the subject acknowledges as being viable. There is no secure landfill for hazardous waste. There is no such thing. And what I'm saying is that with the business, private sector, public sector cooperation, public sector removing those institutional obstacles that exist right now to the private sector going into that business, we can get the best of both worlds, eliminating the waste problem, generating the energy that we can have that can help us to stabilize the outrageous utility costs that we've all had to pay over the last number of years. New initiatives, new vision, and expertise can help us develop that industry which will solve so many of our problems that concern us here tonight.
The next question will come from Susan Caulfield. She is the Times Sunday editor. Susan.
Thank you, Dick. Congressman Florio, there are indications that New Jersey may face a shortfall in its 1982 budget. If that is the case, would you favor a tax increase to fund the shortfall, or would you prefer to see New Jersey follow the example of the federal government and cut the budget? And very specifically, sir, what cuts or tax increases would you favor?
This has been the essence of the campaign, and I'm surprised it's taken so long to get to that question, because what we are doing is facing rather substantial cuts from the federal government. But I think it's important to appreciate the fact that the cuts that are coming to the state government from the federal government amount to about $33 million. I am convinced that I can perform my constitutional responsibility of balancing this budget without imposing any tax to deal with that shortfall. I will do that as a result of the surplus that we have, which is a $22 million surplus, and I have already uncovered some areas where we can effectuate savings at the state government to the point of being able to narrow that gap. So the answer is no, I don't think that we need major cutbacks or major increases of tax in order to balance our budget. Let me hasten to add that we will be receiving, that is the total state, including some of our communities and school boards, probably between $1 and $1.2 billion less from the federal government. Now that's the whole state, that's our whole economy. There is going to be pain. Tom talks about block grants and the great opportunities they provide. There will be pain. And I cannot in good conscience stand before anyone and say that the state of New Jersey is going to walk in and provide, particularly between now and next July, when our state fiscal year starts, $1.2 billion worth of revenues to pick up that shortfall. The answer is that the local people will be making decisions that are going to be hard decisions. But as far as the state and the state budget's concerned, I am committed to going forward, and I believe I can do it, balancing our state budget with that shortfall of $33 million, and that's assuming it doesn't get worse because there are more cuts being promised out of Washington. But if it doesn't get cut worse, I think we can go forward without any new tax increases to balance the budget.
You've talked, Jim, about inflicting pain. I know you've talked about inflicting pain before. I don't know how you define pain, because we have had pain inflicted on us by the Byrne administration now for a number of years. It is that administration, after all, that has not raised welfare payments. It is that administration that has recommended cutting child nutrition. That's school lunches, Jim. It's that administration which has cut the gifted and talented. It's that administration which tried to cut off $64 million in aid to the school districts, aid to libraries, aid to adult education, vocational aid to the handicapped, aid to childhood. That's right, what else is new? Because every year we've had a budget crisis in this state that has afflicted pain on somebody. Now, what I'm talking about is a program to stop that process. What I'm talking is a program for once and all to stimulate little economic development to make New Jersey competitive again. Money. Hey, state government doesn't have any money of its own. It gets its monies from private people and taxes. And when you don't stimulate the people who pay those taxes, you don't get more, you get less. And that's exactly what's been happening to this state. Now, Now, look, we can get into savings, no question about it, to make up as many shortfalls as they can. I can't wait to get it to burn budget. I've been waiting to get at that for years, and I'm delighted to see exactly where I can cut. I'll tell you some areas right away. Department of Labor and Industry was supposed to have $100 million in waste. It was reported by a number of papers and probably by yours. The $50 million in welfare overpayments was reported out from another department. This administration's had an average surplus at the end of the year because they've had bad budget appropriating of average surplus of $150 million, not a smaller surplus than that. That's over an 8-year period. I think there's money there. You had County and Municipal Government Study Commission reported about $355 million of waste in the Department of Human Services because of waste and inefficiency. I think it's time again we did what Bill Cahill did and brought in a private sector commission to look at all areas of state government. They saved... These people want to keep the private sector away from government. I want to bring the private sector in and take a hard look at government. But they saved over $100 million. Over $100 million due to their recommendations. These are the areas where you can look. These are the areas where you can get some savings out of that budget.
Tom doesn't know what pain is. Let me tell him what it is. Yesterday, I participated in the groundbreaking ceremonies at St. John of God in Westville. Bishop Shad and a number of people there were asking, what is it we're going to do? This is a facility for the mentally retarded, and we see what it is that's happening. How are we going to make the decisions? The monies for mental retardation are being cut. We're going to have to make choices. Alcohol abuse, drug abuse, mental retardation, those are the choices. That's pain. Tom's answer is to give away more of our state resources to the multinational corporations in the hope that they will put it back into our state. The impact of giving away that much state money means that 60% of our state budget, which is aid to localities and school districts, will have to be cut. That means the mayors in this audience, the school board people in this audience, will have to further reduce services or increase local property taxes. That's the essence of Tom's proposal. A tax cut for some, but property tax increases for everybody else.
Mr. Kean? Yeah. We'll count that as part of Congressman Florio's 30 seconds.
I would hope so. That is, no, that's absolute nonsense, Jim, and you know it. When you talk about multinational corporations, how come is it that the Governor's Council on Small Business, when they were looked at and asked what should you do about this state, that they came back and recommended the same programs I'm recommending for small business? That's exactly what we're talking about. And you talk about all these things coming out of Washington, the property tax and all of that. Look, the answer to these problems is growth. The only way we'll get more money in state government, only way more money in local government, is to get this state growing again. Now, look, when you talk about things from Washington, we have gotten, as you know, Jim talks about always raises, even above his own Democratic state administration's figures, he always raises the problem from Washington by at least $250 million. So, but even when you bring it back to where the state treasurer says it is, at $750 million, you know how much you had to pay in taxes to get that $750 million? You in New Jersey, you had to pay $1 billion. You know that? Because we get only a little over 70 cents back in this state for every dollar you pay in taxes. That's one thing we've got to do something about. And let me tell you something else. Let me tell you something else. You're going to get over the next couple of years, and you've seen it already, part of it in your paycheck, over $2 billion back and over $5 billion back over the next 4 or 5 years. For the first time, we're reversing that trend, and that's going to help the state.
Well, we're pretty well on time. We have room for one more quick question, and I'll ask Mr. Kean first for a brief 1-minute response, and then Mr. Florio to the same question. It concerns senior citizens. How will you keep senior citizens from losing their homes to higher taxes? Which has happened?
This is one of the most serious and important problems affecting the state. First of all, it was my proposals the last time which increased the tax exemptions that senior citizens have now in order to keep their homes and help them keep their homes in the face of high taxes. I think we've got to look under a number of things. I think we've got to look at rules and regulations and see whether or not senior citizens ought not to be able within communities to live jointly in a number of homes if they want to have less space. And that is a proposal which has been made by a number of senior citizens councils and would be voluntary on the part of older people if they wanted to. Many municipalities have proposals that would not allow them to do this. This, to me, is unfortunate because it would allow an older person to stay within the community that they'd grown up in, that they'd lived in, and that they'd contributed to. This, to me, is very important.
Okay, Mr. Florio.
Yeah, I just do not advocate making people get out of their homes and go live with their neighbors as a means of... What we have to do is to follow the policies that I've pursued and advocated to try to arrest rising utility costs, try to provide for nutritional assistance to those who need it. People shouldn't be forced to make the decision as to whether they're going to pay their food bill or their oil bill. And over and above that, we should reject Tom's proposal. Which will inevitably lead in increased property taxes because of giving away of resources and revenues of this state, which means that local people will have to make the decision, fire policemen, close libraries, or if they don't want to do that, lift property taxes. Property tax increases are the worst things that can happen to senior citizens.
At this point, we'll ask both men to make a closing statement to last 3 minutes, and we'll call on Mr. Florio first for your closing statement, 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. The campaign has been a very, very good one. It's been at a very high level, and we've talked about the issues, but there are some major philosophic differences that are at test here. Concepts of what one's view of society and what one's view of government should be. We would govern, and I think it's fairly clear, the state in a very different way. Tom, in my opinion, would almost take the resources away from government to preclude it from playing an active role in a partnership with the private sector to enhance economic development, to enhance job opportunities. What I've been saying is that we have to have government that is lean, that is cost efficient, that is non-wasteful, but certainly one that is sensitive to the responsibilities of the public sector. If government isn't involved in education, who? If government isn't involved in public safety, who's going to do it? If government isn't going to be involved in making a transportation network operate, the question is who's going to do it? I suppose the key as to what I'm trying to address is to open the process so that people can have input into the governmental process and spell out the alternatives, because rarely is there one answer, one simplistic formula that's going to solve all of our problems. We're here in my congressional district. I'm pleased that over the last number of years, I have developed, I think, a reputation as a congressman whose doors are always open. Regardless of your politics, you come in, we've got a problem, we roll up our sleeves, and we try to respond to it. The people in this congressional district in this last election, which was not exactly a Democratic landslide, elected me by 105,000 majority. I like to think that that means that I have conveyed some philosophic qualities: accessibility, hard work, receptiveness to ideas from wherever they come, and a fair evaluation given to all of them. All I'm telling you is that I can do the same thing for the state of New Jersey that we've been able to do for this district. We, the people of this state, with good, determined, pragmatic leadership, can forge a consensus, develop policies cooperatively, so that New Jersey is not going to be a basket case, that New Jersey can be in the forefront of economic development in the new high-technology industries of the future, so that we can be in the forefront of providing quality education for our people so that they can be trained to take part in that high-quality technology industry of the future, that we can be doing those things that have to be done so that the rest of the nation can look at New Jersey and not regard us as something that is humorous, but in a sense regard us as the bellwether state that leads us into the next decade, and I'm committed to doing that sort of a thing.
Mr. Kean. Please. Folks, we're running out of time, folks. we want to give Mr. Kean his chance.
Yeah.
Mr. Kean.
Yes, thank you. There are a number of differences. I do believe that government has those functions, and very strongly. I also believe that government will not be able to perform those functions if we don't stimulate this economy and get the private sector moving again. We have differences, very important differences. I've spelled out those differences, and I've spelled out programs for jobs in this state to bring more jobs here, programs to get the criminals off the street and in jail where they belong, programs in education, and I'm sorry we weren't allowed to talk about education here in Glassboro, programs in toxic waste, programs in every other area. I've got the background. I've got backgrounds in leadership, backgrounds in education, backgrounds in business that are different than Jim's, and I think better qualify me for this job. And we have a very different philosophy. Jim is right, a very different philosophy. He believes the way to solve every problem, I've come to that conclusion, is really through government. If you can only bring government at whatever level, hopefully a highest level as possible, into play, perhaps you can solve the problem. I don't believe that, because that leads to more government and higher taxes. What I believe is, look, what I believe very strongly is that in this state and in Washington in many cases, government and higher taxes has been the problem. And that's the problem we've got to lick in many cases, not the problem, not the solution. I also believe very, very strongly that this state, as at no other time, desperately needs a change. We cannot go on and on with the same kind of leadership, with the same kind of people, with the same kind of philosophy, and expect New Jersey to grow and prosper and get the kind of pride that you and I are both in favor of. Now, what I say, again, I ask the question, I haven't heard tonight. Have you heard an answer to the single question, is there any person in Burns' cabinet that Jim Florio doesn't agree with? Is there any policy in the Byrne administration that he doesn't agree with? If that, I notice all those contributions from every member of Burns' cabinet. I notice the fact that Burns' chief of staff has taken a leave of absence to run Jim Florio's campaign. I notice the cabinet members who are involved. And you tell me there's going to be a difference, because there isn't then. Look, we can make differences. We can make a change. We can bring new people. We can bring new philosophies. We can rectify all the problems, and so many of the problems that have been inflicted in this state, particularly in South Jersey. I want to bring that pride. I want to bring those new people. I want to bring those ideas, and I very much want to be your next governor. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for a very spirited debate. The next move is up to you. You wouldn't want this debate to go to waste. You have to vote on Election Day. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Dick Sheeran. Have a good day.
You have been watching the third and last planned debate between the candidates for governor of New Jersey. Campaign 81, the gubernatorial debates, has been a special presentation of the New Jersey Network. I'm Larry Stupnagel.